So this year, as normal, I'm just wondering whether you've been up into the attic and brought down the fairy lights along with the tree and everything else that goes with the Christmas decorations. Now, I really think that as far as Christmas decorations are concerned, the young people of today really have no idea whatsoever of what it's really like as regards to the Christmas decorations, particularly the fairy lights. Today we've got LEDs. LEDs are just marvellous. They're no trouble whatsoever, are they? You bring them down from the attic and they are going to work. The youth of today have no idea, because it used to be hours of pain, torture, sat on the landing carpet, trying to work out which bulb had blown just to get all of the rest working. But today is just so much easier with the fairy lights made of LEDs. And it just got me thinking, why? Why is it that we put fairy lights on Christmas trees? Well, our friend Google was able to tell me the answer. And really the tradition stems from Germany. It was the Germans that first of all cut down Christmas trees for Christmas, brought them into their homes. And originally what they used to do was put upon the branches candles. They melt a little bit of wax and somehow attach the candle to the Christmas tree. And of course, as time moved on, the candles turned into electric lights and eventually into the strings of lights that we now call fairy lights. But of course, it begs the question, why fairy lights? Why lights at all? And I suspect that it goes back to something that Jesus said, because ultimately Christmas really is about the Lord Jesus. And he repeatedly said that he was the light of the world. There was one occasion where the Lord Jesus had come into Jerusalem and into the temple and into one of the outer courts during a time of festival. It was the Feast of Tabernacles. It was the time when the Jews remembered a part of their history when God had set them free. And they used to set up tents, and it remembered the wilderness journeys. And of course, during those journeys, they were guided by the day by a pillar of cloud and by night by a pillar of fire. And in remembrance of those times, they used to bring out into the temple 4 huge candelabra. And they used to light these candles in the temple precincts during this feast. And it was at this time that Jesus arrived at the temple and he said, I am the light of the world. Visibly, they had these reminders of light. But Jesus was taking away from those reminders and saying, I am the light of the world. And so it would be really interesting just to explore what it was that Jesus meant by that statement. Well, I think perhaps he was just trying to remind them of some of the prophecies that had been written hundreds of years previously concerning the promised coming Messiah, who the Lord Jesus claimed to be, who we believe him to be. Listen to some of these prophecies from Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. From Isaiah chapter 60, the Lord shall be unto thee an everlasting light. Isaiah 60 again, thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. And so when Jesus made this statement before the people, I am the light of the world, their minds would have bounced back immediately to these prophecies and thought concerning them, well, is Jesus claiming to be God? And that's exactly what he was doing. Even in the phrase, I am, he was harking back to the phrase used when the bush was burning in the wilderness and Moses stood before it. And Moses asked, who is it? Who is it that speaks to me? And God says, I am that I am. And so Jesus is claiming to be God. And that's the message of Christmas, that the Word, God, was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. God, Emmanuel, with us. God with us. So he's telling them in that simple statement, I am the light of the world, that I am God. But what does it mean that he is the light of the world? Interestingly, and we told this story to the children in Sunday school this afternoon, that shortly after his birth, following traditions, the family went to Jerusalem to bring gifts to God in thankfulness for the son that had been born. And whilst they were there, they were met by a man called Simeon, who had been told by God that he wouldn't die until he had seen the promised Messiah. And God pointed out Jesus, the babe Jesus, coming towards him. And Simeon takes the baby and he speaks of Jesus, and he says that he was a light to lighten the Gentiles. And so here we have it, the light of the world, ever that. But what does it mean that he's the light of the world? I think there's a really interesting story that might illustrate the idea to us. You might have heard of Robert Louis Stevenson. Not me, of course, not my relative by any means, but a Scotsman back in Victorian times who wrote a number of really famous novels, the likes of Treasure Island and Kidnapped and Jekyll and Hyde. Well, when he was a little lad living in Edinburgh, it was in the times when the street lights were lit by gas. And there was somebody whose job it was to go around every evening with a taper and light each of the gas lamps. And little Robert Louis Stevenson was looking out of the window one day watching this, and he turned and he ran to somebody in the house and he said, "Look, look, there's a man punching holes in the darkness." And I think that's exactly what Jesus did. When he came as the light to lighten the Gentiles, as he came as being the light of the world, he came to punch holes in the darkness. He said that he is the light of men and the light that shineth in the darkness. A little while after he spoke of himself being the light of the world, the Lord Jesus found himself in Jerusalem again, and a blind man was brought to him, a man who was blind from birth, and he sought to be healed by Jesus. And Jesus said, "As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And he spat upon the ground, and he mixed the dust of the earth with his spittle. You know, this is miraculous. You wouldn't do this naturally. It's foolhardy, naturally speaking. But he then applies that mixture, that gritty mixture, to the eyes of the blind man, and he's healed. And he sends him off to go and see the religious leaders, and he goes to the temple, and they reject him, and they tell him to go away. And so he somehow finds Jesus again. And he tells them of the rejection from the religious people that he's had, and Jesus receives him. And Jesus says to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And the man who had been blind but could now see, he says, "Well, who is he that I might believe him?" And Jesus says, "You see in him. You see him, and it's him that is talking to you now." And the man turns to Jesus and he says, "Lord, I believe. I believe." The light of the world. And this is what Jesus came to do, to punch holes in the darkness. For that blind man, he did it physically, he did it literally, but he also did it spiritually, because that man, he suddenly saw that Jesus really was the light of the world. He is the light of the world too, because he does usher away the darkness, where perhaps we're in the midst of the darkness of falsehood, he brings the light of truth. Where we're in the darkness of ignorance, he brings the light of wisdom. In the darkness of sorrow, he brings the light of joy. In the darkness of despair, he brings the light of hope. And in the darkness of sin, he brings the light of salvation. He's the light of the world. He is able to save the world and also every individual that comes to him, just like that blind man that came to him. He is the light of the world. We read that God is light in the Bible, and in him is no darkness at all. And in that sense too, the Lord Jesus is the light of the world, because there is the complete absence of darkness. And the reason he is described as such is because he alone of men and women in all of mankind was perfect. He was holy. He was blameless. He was without sin. And so he had the right and the ability to come into this world, having lived among us, to go to the cross and to die on our behalf. At this time we remember his birth, but it all points not just to his life and his words and his works, but to the miracle of the salvation he brings, because he dealt with sin and death at Calvary. I just finished with another story. There's a famous painting that has been painted by Holman Hunt back in the 19th century. It hangs in Keble College in Oxford. And I've had the delight of seeing one of its copies. There are many, many copies. And this painting is called The Light of the World. And if you recall it or Google it afterwards and see it, it depicts Jesus standing outside of a door. And the door is covered in ivy and brambles, and it looks like it's to a room that is not well cared for. And in fact, there's no handle on the outside of the door. And the Lord Jesus is knocking the door. He's carrying a lamp. He's the light of the world. And Holman Hunt has painted this in reference to some words in Revelation chapter 3. These are the words. Jesus saying, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me." And the reason for that painting is this. The light of the world, Jesus. He knocks upon a door. What's the door? It's our heart's door. The door to our lives. And he seeks entrance into our lives to punch a hole in darkness and to give us his light, to give us his life, to give us his joy, his peace, his forgiveness. He's ready to punch a hole in the darkness. He said, we go back to the words that we read right at the beginning, in John chapter 8 and verse 12. He said, "I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." And so, now, this Christmas, as at all times, Jesus bids us to follow him. There's an old psalm that says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." The Lord Jesus, that word is the Bible, but the Lord Jesus is the Word made flesh. In following Jesus Christ, we have light in our lives, light to lead our lives. But to follow him, what does it mean? Well, it isn't just to accept with some level of belief that yes, he is God and he was a miracle worker, a teacher, and that he existed and so on. Not to follow means to leave behind what you once had. It may be to leave behind your old beliefs and your principles, maybe your old life, and maybe lots of things that get in the way between you and God. He says, "Follow me." take up my cross, follow me. Well, this is our wish, our hope, our prayer for each one of us this Christmas, that we will discover he who punches holes in the darkness, the light of the world, Jesus Christ. Thank you. And we just